All right, fine, I'll accept.
Hi, everybody. Quick intro for anybody that doesn't know who we are. We are the Sun City Investors. Myself, I'm Denise Franco with Franco Real Estate Group. We have Jacob Firnekas. He is with Lulu Lots. And today we are going to be talking about how to grow your rental portfolio quickly and strategically. And for somebody that's picked up multiple units, Jacob's going to go ahead and lead this class. Do me a favor, you guys. Please, if you haven't already, mute yourself. It's just going to help everybody else be able to hear better. And then if you guys can either hold your questions to the end or type them in the chat box, and then I'll be looking out for those questions. If it's something that I think is best for him to address in that minute, I'll go ahead and let him know to address that question. If I know it's a question that's coming up in the presentation and we're going to get to it, I'll go ahead and hold off. But this way we can be as efficient with our time as possible and get everybody's questions answered. And with that, I'll turn it over to you.
All righty, love it. All right, guys. So now that we've covered some of our admin notes, we get to talk about rental properties. And there's going to be a few people who are part of this group who may have quite a bit of experience with it. And I have a little bit, but I got a microphone, so I guess you'll listen for a little bit, maybe. Anyway, we'll cover a couple different things, but I guess very first thing we'll go ahead and start off with is, what is a rental property? So a rental property, and this is my definition, so if you got a Merriam-Webster one, by all means you can chime in with it too, but my definition for rental property is a property that's used to generate income through cash flow. And all that means is that you have something that you go ahead and rent that produces income. It can be done with equipment. Right now we're talking about rental properties, but it's applicable for anything that is valuable. So moving on, looks like I got a couple different things, and Denise and I game planned a little bit there because I'm not used to a whole lot of structure, so thank you. But what the very first thing is talking about why I'm passionate about rental properties. And in general, I am a huge advocate for real estate, but I particularly like rental properties because they allow you to accumulate wealth relatively passively. And if you have the goal to reach financial independence, it's a pretty good route to do it. A lot of people have done it that way. And the beautiful thing about rental property investing is, and investing in general, is if you're doing it correctly, and if you're maintaining everything up front correctly, it's a pretty boring process, which is good. We don't want it to be too exciting. And by the way, that particular phrasing right there, I had a conversation with a guy about a week ago, and he had mentioned boring, and I go, yes, I like that. And I've never thought about it like that, but we want this industry, if we're doing everything correctly after the acquisition, okay, to be boring and relatively passive. And with rental properties, they're not management intensive as a general rule, the traditional model anyway. And so it can be relatively passive. So that's why I'm a big advocate for it. For you guys, same rules pretty much apply. But if we had to go ahead and break it down with just broad strokes, you can grow your wealth while you sleep. You have great lending products if you choose to use loans. And as you grow, you can begin to outsource more, if not almost the entirety of the process of management, to third-party companies. So they serve as a fairly passive vehicle to operate as a business to accumulate wealth. And there's a lot of different reasons why that I'll go ahead and dive after here in just a minute. But first one is rental properties is, how do we make money? And that's the biggest thing we're actually concerned about anytime we use the word investing, because we're taking capital that we have managed to save through whatever means. Like, I don't know how you guys got the money, but most of us, it's because we've been saving it from excess income. And then we've decided that we want to make our money work for us, so that at a certain point in our lives, we no longer have to work as hard or at all, depending on what your goals are. So with rental properties, you actually get paid a lot of different ways. The first one is cash flow. I make X amount of money above whatever my monthly expenses are. Next one is appreciation. And everybody's heard the stories of properties going up in value over the course of years. So maybe you bought it for 100 and a couple years later, maybe you were able to sell it at 110, 120. So you get different things through appreciation. The next one though is actually the opposite direction. So you have depreciation. And depreciation is basically just when you have assets, the I guess I'll call it the IRS basically says that over time they know that these assets are going to start to wear out, different repairs and other stuff like that. So they let you take tax deductions based on what they expect that asset to lose value over time. And also in that same category, when you have to do repairs or anything like that on your properties, those also end up being tax deductible as an expense. So they turn into write-offs. So even though you're paying for it and it feels like you're losing money, you still get to claim that on taxes. By the way, real quick disclaimer, I am not a tax professional. So everything that I say, if it's involved with lending, taxes, anything like that, it is strictly my opinion or my perspective. It is not legal advice. All right. We'll get that out of the way too. Next one that you get though is you get loan pay down. So when you borrow money, typically you're going to be put on some type of an amortization schedule that over time you're going to start to pay down the principal balance. And so you'll owe less. In the residential space. Oop, we all right? I had an emergency warning there. So in the residential space, we're typically on a 30-year amortization schedule, which means we start out with a principal and interest payment that is a fixed amount, a fixed payment amount that we will automatically end up paying that loan off in 30 years. And so your interest starts dropping and your principal increases, but your payment stays the same all the way across the board. So we make money that way. And the final one, and this one's a little bit of an oddity, but call it inflation hedging. So if you're using a loan on a property, what you end up doing is, like right now, we have interest rates that are historic lows. And by the way, they were historic lows a while back too, and they are historic lows again. So if we get a loan on a property right now, say at 3%, 3.25, whatever it might be, we can lock in an interest rate. And on these residential mortgages, we can lock in an interest rate for a very long time, typically for the length of that loan for 30 years. And if we want to keep it, we can. Whereas in 5 to 10 years, we may not be able to borrow money at 3%, 3.25. We might be borrowing money at, say, 4 or 5, 6%. So we lock in a fixed interest rate. Also, we locked in a fixed price. So even though values, like, because we have inflation continually happening in the background, even though this property rents for $1,000 a month right now, that same exact property with the same exact utility may rent for $1,100 later on, but that same price may now be from 100 to 110. So when we go ahead and we buy an asset that produces income now at a fixed rate with a fixed interest rate too, we have a way to kind of hedge a little bit against inflation. And we get the benefits of that also through the loan pay down, fixed interest rate, and the appreciation. So those are a couple different ways you get paid. So recap is cash flow, appreciation, depreciation, loan pay down, and we'll go ahead and call it inflation hedging. That's fixed interest rates and buying something now that is going to be worth more later. But that's just because pricing keeps on going up later on. What are the advantages to real estate? So a beautiful thing about real estate is they are very stable. In the residential space, people are always going to need a place to live. And even if you're buying at the polar opposite ends of the spectrum, super high priced or super low priced, you're always going to have people somewhere that are willing to go ahead and rent that location. Like you can rent just about anything, just about anywhere if you set the right price for it. And it's because people have a need for housing. Like, you could go ahead and rent out Scarface's place there if the price was cheap enough on it. And likewise, you're going to have low income housing too that's always going to be available that people are going to want to rent out. So you have a very, very big pool of people that you'll find. And once people are in, they tend to be stabilized for quite a while too. But people aren't going to just stop living somewhere forever. Like, people are always going to have a need to have a place to live. Next one is they tend to be pretty secure. So real estate is a tangible asset. It's something you can touch. So it has intrinsic value. If nothing else, you own the land underneath it, but you actually have the property, the actual house, that has value to it. Like, there's material cost. Just from like a numbers standpoint, you could rip a house apart and sell it piece by piece, and you could get value out of selling out that house piece by piece. Now, given I would never suggest that, and I'm not about to say that you're going to get the same value out of it, but what I'm saying is it's a tangible asset and it has value to it. And one of the other benefits too is real estate is an asset class that you can leverage. There's different asset classes and different investment types that you really can't leverage as hard, or at least it's not very common. But a good example, and if anybody is really savvy with stocks too, you can leverage on stocks too. But as a general rule, when you buy stocks, you tend to buy them outright. It's a fixed price, and you're not leveraged on them. With real estate, you can typically leverage 4 to 1. How's my math working there? Maybe it's 5 to 1. I guess that's the right word for it. So you can pick up an asset for 20% out of pocket cost on it and an 80% loan. And that's more or less your traditional investment. Worst case is 25% down and a 75% loan. And you can find that almost all day. So they are an asset class that you can leverage, which when we talk about like investing in like precious metals, businesses, anything like that, it tends not to be the same. But it has some disadvantages, I suppose, too. Real estate from an investment standpoint, strictly investment, tends to be a little bit more capital intensive upfront if you're buying an income property as your very first property. So you may have to put 20% down. There's ways around that too, depending on if you're willing to go ahead and house hack, which, just a super quick recap, it's buying a property to live in that doubles as an investment in whatever capacity you're looking at using it for. Another disadvantage, though, is that it is going to require some management. But realistically, any investment you're going to run across, if it is cash flow producing, most likely it is going to require some degree of management. And in the case of real estate, you can usually outsource that. You got regular upkeep. So there's going to be upkeeping the asset, making sure that stuff isn't broke, and if it is, you need to fix it. There's people who don't, you can still rent stuff out, and I would highly recommend that you are not one of those people. But you can also get higher rents by maintaining the asset too. So there's that, and you get better quality tenants. On the management piece too, the biggest thing that scares people off isn't that you're managing some type of a stream of cash flow, it's that you have to deal with people. And so there is a skill set that's associated with that, but nuts and bolts is, if you vet people correctly and treat people appropriately, you tend to kind of do all right. And if you can't do that, that's all right too. There's companies you can hire for it. But it is required, so I'll go ahead and label it as a disadvantage. That's fair. And then we end up running across cap rates. So we'll talk about a cap rate. And a cap rate is just an evaluation of value, saying that if I bought this asset for this price, I'll make this much money on my money each year. If I bought an asset for $100,000 cash and I bought it at a 10% cap rate, I would make 10% on my money, or $10,000 per year. So cap rate it's handy, but isn't that big of a thing for a lot of real estate. It can be a useful metric to evaluate, but it isn't the end all be all. But I'll say that the cap rate can be relatively low on some properties when you compare it to, and this will happen sometimes if you start looking for investments, like brick and mortar style businesses. So brick and mortar businesses, let's say like your bars, your restaurants, your customer service industries, they tend to be at much higher valuations because they tend to be a lot more, they tend to make more money cash flow wise than real estate does, but they are also much, much, much more management intensive. And so we can use cap rate to evaluate both of these businesses, but a lot of the time it doesn't detail the amount of extra work that goes into it through management. So, but like if you look at like, because I had a bar for a little while, and I sold my bar, and I think I sold my bar at like a 30 to 50% cap rate. Like I sold it for like $35,000 when um, it wasn't making a whole lot of money. But even when it was performing optimally, if I had sold it for $50,000, let's say that it was making $25,000 a year net, most likely I wouldn't be able to sell that bar for anything more than $75,000, just because it is management intensive. Whereas like real estate, like I might be able to sell that thing at 10-1. If we're at a 5 cap, I might be able to sell it at 20-1. So it makes $10,000 a year. If I can sell it at 20-1, I can sell it for $200,000. So it's a drawback on the purchase, but it's a benefit at the sale. But anyway, those are a few disadvantages that differ from like brick and mortar style businesses. Let's see what else we got here. I'll talk a little bit on loan products. And so I don't know how familiar everybody is, but maybe you're curious on what sort of loan products you can get on these things. And they tend to be kind of handy. So just a couple quick ones that we can touch base on are, call it, you can go as aggressive as a VA loan, which is a zero down loan. And you can go as conservative as paying all cash for a property. For the vast majority of us, we're going to land somewhere in the middle. But if you're starting out in the investing space, most likely you may be looking at using an FHA or first time home buyer's loan, which you might be able to get into a property with 3.5% to 5% down. Investment properties tend to be 20, 25%. But those loans you can use to leverage yourself into a property. And you can use it on a 2 to 4 unit. You could use it on a quadruplex and still qualify for that loan product. So you could buy, let's say, a $100,000 house that rents for $1,000 a month with 3.5% down, so $3,500 down. Or you could buy a quadruplex, $4,000 a month for $400,000, and now you're looking at coming out of pocket $14,000. When normally, if you were to do that on the investment property in the first case, you'd have to put down 20, and on the $400,000 property, you'd be looking at putting down, I think it'd be like $80,000. But if you use that loan product the correct way, you can leverage a much larger asset acquisition with not a whole lot of money out of pocket. And you got interest rates, and they range anywhere from like the low end of close to 3% right now. I've heard stories on refinances with equity, anything like that, on being under 3%, but I don't know if it's all here. And on the high end, like you have like hard money and other stuff like that, which is expensive. In some cases, it could be mid-teens as far as interest rates. So it's short-term money. But you got different loan products that you can use for different acquisition strategies. So if it's like non-performing or underperforming and non-bankable, you could buy it with a hard money loan and then refinance under these better loan products. And in theory, you can do something called a BRRRR, buy, rent, rehab, rent, refinance, repeat, where you pick it up, hard money, you're using it as bridge loan, you're doing your renovations, you drop a tenant in it, and then you go and walk up to the bank and you go, hey, I want to pull money out of this and refinance it. And I go, okay, we'll give you up to 75%, 80%, whatever it is. So you pull your money back out. And that's where those loan products end up being really, really, really beneficial, is because it allows you to keep cycling your capital. Because the biggest thing that stops most people from buying more is, one, finding a good deal, but usually it's your capital that's available. So with these different loan products, if you're buying retail, there's nothing wrong with that. You wait for equity accumulation through appreciation and loan pay down. And if you're buying on margin or value add, you have the ability to buy at a discounted rate, fix it up, rent it out, and then refinance. So that gives you a little bit of information on that. And I guess what I can do is share a couple of my personal experiences with this, and also let you know too, like everybody's criteria on rentals is going to be different. So my criteria for rentals is going to be different than your criteria for rentals. But it's also worth noting too that that's based around what resources we have available to us, what experience we have too, and where we are in our life cycle on investing or income really. If you're early on in your investing career and maybe you're working a minimum wage job, and you don't have any assets or any real savings, your strategy is going to be very different than somebody who is getting closer to retirement and looking for stabilized assets. But maybe they have a larger chunk of money that they can go ahead and deploy on this and they're bankable. And maybe they still make really good income. So like everybody's criteria is going to be different. I can go over my criteria later on if you guys would like, but I'll leave that for questions here in a little bit. And finally, like I'll just cover a couple of my personal experiences with this. I have never bought a property without using hard money because I tend to focus on value add. But what that means is I am intimately familiar with high interest rates. But I've bought my very first rental property was a subject to, caught up the payments for $8,500. Picked it up for $70,000. Gross rents would be $1,000 a month. Kicked the woman out. She'd been living there 30 years and she was losing the house, and I kicked her out. And then I fixed up the property and I talked with her and I asked her if she wanted to rent again. And she said yes. And so I put her back in the rental property. I actually talked with her earlier today on rent. And so she's been my renter for about 4 years now. I took that property and it was a subject to, I refinanced it underneath a hard money loan to pull capital out. And I just refinanced it about 3 months ago underneath long-term lending at 3.5% interest, 75% loan to value. And so now I have a loan value on it for about $100,000. So I was able to pull out some additional equity on it to the tune of about $15,000, $20,000. So I am in that property right now out of pocket for $0.00. But that's because we can use loan products. And on that particular deal right now, her gross rent is $1,160 per month. I help out on utilities, but on that particular one, they don't typically amount to much more than about $100 a month. So my effective rent's like $1,050, and my new mortgage payment is $762. So it puts me below 75% of the gross rent. I pulled money out and now I have an asset that's worth, it's like 135,000. It's not a big one, but you can pick those up and it'll cash flow just a little bit. But the benefit too is I stay bankable right now due to where the rent is and where my loan payment is. And it'll allow me to qualify for more loans later on. I did the same thing with my very first house. I picked it up for 91,000, hard money loan, closed on it, put $15,000 into it, and then did an immediate refinance within 30 days. So I closed on it the 31st of December that year, never made a hard money loan payment, and refinanced underneath a long-term loan of like $900 a month when gross rents were like 1,300. And so that was handy there. Did the same thing with like a duplex. I had a horrible time with a triplex that I can share a story with on everybody on what not to do with it. And it wasn't that it was a bad deal. It was picked up at a good price with value add. It's just trying, and I'll stress it a little bit, of making sure you do appropriate amounts of repairs to get one, desirable tenants, and to two, avoid having maintenance issues because they'll kill you. That's all right. We plan for it up front. Final couple is I recently transitioned into commercial, and that's a little bit different than some of our conversation here, but the same basic principles apply in that you evaluate it based on income, You find a price, you get a loan on it if you need a loan. And if you manage them correctly and get them optimized, they do perform. On the commercial one I picked up recently, my gross payments will be about $5,200 a month. And the gross income is going to be between $9,000 and $10,000 a month once it's stabilized. But you can do the same thing through houses, through small multifamily on into commercial. All the principles apply. But anyway, that's all I have right now. Let me go ahead and open it up to any questions. All right, so it looks like we got one right now. And all right, we got one here from Esperanza. And how much do I budget for repairs? So on repairs, it depends on the property. So I'm typically used to having heavy value add. So I'm typically expecting I'm going to have to tear through and renovate just about everything. But let's say you buy a property that's in decent condition. What I would probably go ahead and budget for would be making sure that you have no less than a month worth of gross expenses, and then probably $1,000 per unit for turning. And then if you're planning on going in and having to do some renovation on it, I'd almost guarantee that if you buy a property, you're going to have to do paint minimum on the inside and do a deep clean. So I'd probably budget, even if it's super light, I'd plan on $5,000 out of pocket if it's a normal type of rental, because you're going to have odds and ends, some basic repairs, and then cleaning and tenanting and whatnot. And if it's vacant, you might have a month worth of vacancy potentially while you get in there, do any repair work or whatnot. Did that answer your question, or was it a little bit different?
Yeah, that answered my question.
Okay, just making sure. All right. Do we have any other questions on anything on this?
I have a couple of questions. First, shout out to Esperanza. I see you posting about your newest investment property, and you go girl, you go girl. We're all rooting you on. Good job on all the repairs that you're doing, and we're wishing you much luck and success with this investment property.
Oh, thank you very much.
Of
I'm
course.
I
learning
had
a lot.
forgotten about that.
And don't
Actually, yeah,
hesitate
if you
to
have any
reach out
questions.
to us privately also if you need anything. Okay, Esperanza?
Sure, thank you.
Yeah, I completely forgot. I remember you talking about that too. If you got any questions, concerns, anything at all, reach out. Like, I may not know everything on it, but I have been through the ringer a couple of times on some different investment properties. So I can probably help you out if you don't know the answer. And if I don't know the answer, I probably can find somebody who does.
Yeah, it's just different because the house is so old that it needs so much work, and so yeah, it's different. I used to have other properties that were like 10, 15 years old, so they didn't need that much fixing.
Well, if you don't mind me asking, what kind of a property is it? Is it single family, multifamily,
It's a duplex.
duplex? And are the units separately metered?
Yes.
Okay, that helps out a lot.
Yeah.
And what are you finding is like a major hiccup that you've been running into? If you don't mind me asking. If not, we can always talk about it offline too.
No, it is because the other properties that I had, like I said, they were 10 or 15 years old, so they did needed repairs, but not like this one where I had to do like major electrical because it's from the 40s. So I had to do they had to rewire that full house. So yeah.
Yep. And you're probably having to go do a whole bunch of stuff to start to bring everything up to code.
Yes, that's different. Yep.
Yeah, the only other one that I'd pay attention to now that you said that wiring is, I'm curious how your plumbing looks right now on it too, and if it has the old
yeah, it has
cast
copper.
iron.
Yep,
Copper?
it does. Yep. So
Yep,
like I
so
say,
that's-
it's working right now, but as soon it breaks, it's gonna be a major expense.
Well, were you able to pick it up on a traditional loan, or are you underneath hard money right now?
No, it's actually I was able to get a traditional loan.
Good, that helps out a lot. So
Yeah.
even though you may end up dropping a decent amount of capex on that thing over time, it should at least cash flow to the point where you can start setting aside a little bit of a cash reserve for that vacancy, and for CapEx.
Yep.
So I like it though. Perfect. See, this is what we need to do. We're picking up properties.
One more quick note to Esperanza. By any chance, did you do a sewer scope inspection on it?
No, I did not.
Okay, that's an option for you. Chastity's on here, right? Chastity, can you give them the number to AAA if that's something that you're interested in? Because you already know that it's the old cast iron pipes. If you want to get ahead of the game, you can order a sewer scope inspection and they'll run a line with a little camera in it through the scope and they can see if there's any roots that are coming in and they can also see if anything's cracked in there.
But that's different than the regular inspection, right?
Yeah, different than it's just for the sewer.
Yeah, because I did the regular inspection with AAA, but I didn't do anything besides the regular stuff.
And you don't have to do it now, but just food for thought because you brought it up. I'm thinking that you might be anticipating something. You can check it out.
Yes.
It'll help you get to the root of your problem.
Yeah, well, thank you for sharing that.
If it
I also
helps.
wanted to mention, you talked about this briefly, Jacob. For anybody that's considering becoming a landlord, anybody that's considering getting into real estate investing or already is investing, I think it's really important to remember the responsibility that we carry as real estate investors and or landlords, whether we're fixing and flipping or being landlords. And you touched on it briefly, Jacob, but I kind of wanted to put it out there a little more because we really have the ability to make a difference in the community as far as, you know, how are tenants being treated? At the end of the day, tenants are just people that need somewhere to live also. Jacob, you said something about, you know, be a good landlord, make those fixes. A lot of times, especially here on the border, we get people that don't want to say too much and don't want to be intrusive, but you know, everybody has a right to live in a safe, comfortable living situation. So just kind of take that into consideration when you're a landlord and take into consideration that you're getting a lot out of being a landlord. The tenants that are staying in your property are helping you and your family acquire generational wealth and become more financially independent. So treat your tenants right. You know, be empathetic to the fact that they need certain things too. Also, when we're fixing and flipping, that actually helps the community also because, or even if you hold on to the property, when you fix a property, it helps the value of the entire community. So I just kind of wanted to touch on that, but I did have a couple of questions for you, Jacob.
Yeah.
What do you think is, or do you see a difference in buying a more economical house as a rental versus buying, something above the average sales price, let's say in El Paso? Do you see a difference in how much I'm going to make back on my return on, let's say, $100,000 home versus something that's $300,000? Or is it relatively equal as far as return on investment?
I would say that there's two components to this. One is we'll talk briefly on cap rate, and or maybe a better one would be like gross rent multiplier. And gross rent multiplier just says like, hey, I bought this property for $100,000 and it rents for $1,000 a month. I'm at 100 gross rent multiplier versus like, hey, I bought it for $50,000 and it rents for $1,000 a month. So I'm at a 50 gross rent multiplier. So there is something to be said about buying something at a higher cap rate, but the reason you tend to have a higher cap rate is because it tends to be more management intensive and not as stable. But if you're okay with doing that, or you have a team that can handle a higher cap rate or more management intensive property, you're fine. Example being, let's take the Angel's Triangle, formerly known as the Devil's Triangle. Just because it's kind of infamous or famous, depending. I think it's becoming famous, maybe. Anyway, you tend to have higher cap rates in the Devil's Triangle. And the reason being is you tend to have lower end style rentals in a little bit rougher neighborhood. So your quality of tenant isn't going to be as good as, say, oh, I don't know, a brand new build house on the east side at $250,000 purchase price. But your rental value on that thing may only be like $1,700-$1,800 a month. So it's like a sliding scale. I would say you'll likely have a more qualified and potentially be able to find a better quality tenant on the nicer property. However, your return on your capital involved may end up being less than if you bought somewhere that has a higher cap rate. But the reason for that too is you're buying something that might not be as desirable to other investors. So I'm guessing even in this group right here, we have people who wouldn't want anything that Devil's Triangle. Like, I'd be willing to buy stuff there all day. It doesn't bother me an iota, but I'm also comfortable with any management we have there. And if for some reason I'm not comfortable with it personally, I know I can outsource it to a third party manager. And so you just got to understand that, like, hey, maybe they're not going to be quite as nice. We might have a higher repair amount. We might have a higher vacancy rate. But if we go ahead and factor that into our numbers, we're all right. For people starting out, a lot of people were only wanted to go ahead and pick up properties that they'd feel comfortable living in, which is fine too. There's nothing wrong with that. A lot of the time, your first rental property is going to be a house that you felt comfortable living in because you bought it to live in, and now you're moving. If you're evaluating something from an investment standpoint, I would try to go with an asset that has the highest cap rate you can find and still be comfortable going into that neighborhood at night if you had to go and pick up rent for somebody starting out. And I think that's probably the nicest mixture of the two. So I don't know if that answers the question directly or not.
It does. Thank you. So for everybody, just a quick reminder, in the chat box, Chastity did add AAA home and termite inspections information. So if you guys want to grab that, especially you, Esperanza. And then Sean has a question for us. Denise and Jacob, other than El Paso, what other markets do you buy in? So I'll answer and then I'll let you take over, Jacob. I haven't had the opportunity to buy in anywhere besides El Paso. If I had to look elsewhere, I do have a few other markets that I would like to look in, and that I've touched on before. Atlanta, Georgia has a pretty good rental market, in my opinion. North Carolina, there's some areas in there, but I'd probably stick to Atlanta, Georgia would probably be my first pick.
That's fair. Right now I haven't done any investing outside of El Paso leading off, but I'm looking at trying to snag a property there in Seattle. Well, and I'll tell you why. I looked at the pricing of quadruplexes there in Seattle, and they're expensive. They're like 1.2 to 1.8 million. But what I also figured out too, after talking with them, is that my VA loan will qualify for that. So I may be able to get a zero down property in Seattle as a quadruplex that'll more or less pay for itself. And now I got to come out of pocket closing costs, which will be expensive too. But it seems like a more economic use of my VA loan if I had to pick a spot. That doesn't mean that that's the only place to use it, or like, hey, we need to stop investing here. By no means. But for me, I have family up there too. So it makes sense for me to go ahead and at least evaluate it to see if it makes sense. As far as here, I've evaluated Las Cruces and I've evaluated Alamogordo. Both are fine. Realistically, there aren't a whole lot of markets. There's some states that I might not like landlord tenant laws in, honestly, and maybe a little bit of taxation. But barring that, I'd be comfortable going just about anywhere if I knew the income was high enough, if I knew our return on investment would be high enough first. And second, if I could make sure that we can completely outsource all the management and other criteria we had for the property. And third, I'd need somebody in that market who I felt very comfortable with, that we had qualified the property and the investment correctly for our underwriting. So other than that, I really wouldn't have too much of a restriction on going just about anywhere if we found a deal that made sense.
Agree. I have one more question for you.
Yes,
I'd
you and
like
White.
to gear this to anybody that's currently trying to house hack. So we talked about this recently. When you house hack, if you go to apply for an FHA or conventional loan, you're automatically qualified for a 1 to 4 unit. So
Mhm.
for anybody that, let's say that I just qualified for a primary home loan and I would like to house hack. Can you give me the pros and the cons on buying a 1 unit versus buying a multi-unit? And let's just keep it strict, keep it strictly to like a 2 to 4 unit for this example.
So let's say that you have or can beg, borrow, steal, whatever it is, $20,000. Okay. And when I say steal, I mean emotionally stealing hearts of people who are going to lend you money, not the other one. So let's say you have like $20,000 and you want to go ahead and pick up a house for $100,000 on an FHA loan. You're looking at $3,500 out of pocket down, 3.5%, and then you have closing costs. And we'll just say it's like 5. So you're in it for $8,500. You got 12,000 left over, so you're good to go. And it rents for $1,000 a month. That's cool, and it's great for your first house because it's probably somewhere you want to live. What you could do though, and let's say it's a 3-bedroom, 2-bath. Well, maybe you can find a quadruplex for $400,000 that they can qualify 3 of the leases in as income on the property because they have a year-long tenant or whatever it is. And you can pick it up with your FHA loan. Let's say, I'm not sure what the stipulations are. I know you can do it with VA. I think you can do it with FHA too, but I'm not sure what the cap is. Anyway, you'd be looking at $14,000 down plus closing, which is probably going to be comparable too. So with the same $20,000 pot of money, you could pick up a $400,000 asset that gross rents are $4,000 a month, or you could pick up a $100,000 asset with gross rents of $1,000 a month. It is a more efficient use of that loan product to pick up the multifamily, so long as you can stomach living in close proximity to people, and it's not bad either. It could be depending on what you look at, because I bought some that didn't make very good sense and they were very close proximity. But if you're buying in an area where you're comfortable living, and you can deal with it, it's not that big of a thing because you can use the FHA loan now for the quadruplex. And then your next property you pick up, now it's your very first investment property. So now you put 20% down on maybe a $100,000 house or $20,000. Whereas if you use the FHA on the $100,000 house, and now you pick up the quadruplex, now you'd be coming out of pocket $80,000 down. So it makes more sense to use that for multifamily if you can find multifamily that makes sense for you, your situation, and criteria. Conventional figure, you're looking at, in some cases, as little as 15% down. I would always plan for 20 to 25% down. There's a couple lenders who have less down, but their interest rates tend to be a little bit more aggressive too. For me, where I'm at now, I would be more concerned with low down on a bridge loan and low interest rate on a fixed loan, i.e. hard money. I care, but I don't care as much on the interest rate if I can buy on margin, if I'm using it to get into long-term lending. But my long-term lending, I would like the lowest interest rate I can possibly get while having the highest equity position that doesn't compromise my interest rate. An example would be Wells Fargo will do 85% loan to value, but their interest rates on investment property are like 5% versus we'll say like Westar may do and I forget their rates. There's a couple other ones that will do better rates, but maybe they'll do it like 4%, 3.5% on a 30, but they won't lend you any more than 75% loan to value. I think they're at 80 though, but no more than 75% loan to value. I would rather go after that loan product than the one with less down, because you're going to cash flow better, but it's going to tie up your money.
That's all I have. Do you guys have any final questions? Yes. we have everyone introduce themselves and share a bit about their personal experience investing in real estate.
Yeah.
So here's what I'm gonna do, Antonio. Why don't we just go ahead and finish out for anybody that wants to stay? Let's leave you all on. But because we are running into that hour and this is gonna take a minute, let's go ahead and close out. And then for whoever wants to stay, we can definitely do that. Fair?
Perfect.
Okay. Any final remarks, Jacob, to close out?
Yep, I got a handy dandy sheet here, like Blue's Clues. I got my notebook, so give me a second. But it's to make sure that we got everybody kind of on the same page. So, just so everybody's tracking here. Oh, and a final thought too on the whole rental thing too. Some people are probably on the fence about whether or not they want to get started in investing. Some people are waiting for like a market crash and other stuff like that. Or all sorts of other stuff. And there's nothing wrong with waiting. The one thing I will tell you though is, if you were to ask somebody the best time to plant a tree, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is right now. So even though we may want to go ahead and have a strategy to try to wait to get involved in the industry for some type of a crash or a change, it would behoove us to get started sooner rather than later, because what we're doing too when we're taking a look at market changes or anything else is we're speculating. And what that ends up being is, if you were in the stock market right now and you're speculating on the price dropping before you get in, or worse, you're speculating on the price going up before you get out, and you're not planning on holding the thing long term, what you're doing is you're gambling. Now, if you know the industry, it might be a calculated risk, but it's a gamble. The sooner you can get into a market and start investing in a safe way and get something stabilized, like our interest rates are at lows. So if we do have any sort of a market change or a market crash, I would venture a guess that we're not going to have those low interest rates for any reasonable amount of time. And by the way, I wouldn't really expect any sort of a price change or reduction either. I'd expect a stabilization, and we're at our new normal for pricing right now. The only difference is whether or not our interest rates change and our rents keep up too. And they kind of are too. They're adjusting for it as well. So don't expect that like we're going to go back to pricing that we had 5 years ago, because I think it's unrealistic. I would encourage everybody, if you're wanting to get involved, to start going through the process of getting involved in investing and go through the underwriting process. But you're going to have great products right now. So don't hold off just because you're waiting for a shift. Like, there were people who made money in the before the real estate crash, going into the crash, all the way up to the crash. There's people who made money all the way throughout this. The only thing is, like, people make money in up markets and down markets. It's just a change in strategy. So that's what I'll say on that.
And one
if
more
you guys
question real quick.
Mhm.
Can you give us your insight on the big trend with Airbnb rentals?
I can, and I think real quick what I'll do, let's do you want to go ahead and do this, is close this out for our information coming up, and then we'll open it up to discussions on some questions and introduction.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah,
So,
just so I can go through this, because I can answer a couple of this as I'm on the move too, so I'm not static the whole time.
okay,
But
yeah. That's a good closing point. So let's go ahead and let you guys know about our upcoming event. So our next event is going to be October 23rd, correct?
Yep.
October 23rd. That is a couple of Saturdays from now. Sorry, a couple of Saturdays from now. We do have a new venue. So if you guys are new, the way that we usually try to stagger this is once a month, we will do an in-person meeting. Once a month, we will do a virtual meeting. So this is our virtual meeting. And then in 2 weeks, we'll do our in-person. We have the location that we meet at now is going to be our new location until further notice, which is the Applebee's on Yarborough and Gateway East. And that starts at 2 p.m. So mark your calendars, save the date, invite your friends. October 23rd, 2 p.m. at Applebee's. That'll be our next meeting. With that, I'm actually going to go ahead and conclude this meeting and stop recording for anybody that needs to jump off, because we do try to keep it at an hour. For anybody that's willing to stay on, we'll dive a little bit deeper into the questions here. Jacob, final remarks before I close out?
If anybody needs any help, feedback on analyzing a deal, finding deals, anything like that, feel free to reach out to Denise. She's pretty good. I've worked with her a little bit now, so if you need to, I would get in touch with her if you need any type of a market analysis, rental analysis, and are trying to understand your first acquisition. And if you guys need any help on analyzing a deal or trying to, because what happens is your first couple deals there, you're like, oh God, what am I doing? Is this like, am I making a good decision? And like, most likely you got a pretty good idea what it is. You're just looking for feedback. So if you guys need help on analysis, feedback, anything like that, feel free to reach out to me. My contact info, I think everybody here has it, but in case you don't, you can give me a call or a text message at 915-727-7495. And Denise, if you'd share yours too, that way they can find you if they need to.
Sorry, on mute. I was on mute. So you guys can find me. I'm just gonna go ahead and I'm gonna actually put my number in the chat box for you guys, because we're gonna post this somewhere, and I would like to keep my number internal.
Ooh. Oh, that's fair. Actually, you have, yeah.
All right, so with that, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. Thank you guys. Have a wonderful night. Please stay on if you'd like to continue with the questions.